It started with a sound, a phone vibrating on the bathroom counter while the shower ran. A small, harmless noise. But anyone who's lived long enough knows that ruin rarely kicks down the door, it slips in quietly, wearing familiar shoes. Julia's phone never used to be locked. After 30 years of marriage, we built the kind of trust where you forget that privacy even exists. But that morning, as I brushed my teeth, the screen lit up and waited for a face that wasn't mine. The message preview flashed once before fading. Marcus, miss you already. You taste like trouble. The name didn't belong in our life. The words didn't belong to friendship. My first thought wasn't anger, it was inventory. My brain, that stubborn accountant of reality, started adding and subtracting. Her work trips, the perfume I didn't recognize, the laughter that stopped too suddenly when I entered the room. I stared at the message until the screen dimmed, then placed the phone back exactly where it had been. I didn't want her to know I'd seen it, not yet. I needed time to let the truth sharpen itself. When she came out of the shower, hair wrapped in a towel, humming, she smiled at me the way people smile when they think they're safe. "Morning," she said. "Coffee?" I nodded. She poured, kissed my cheek, and left for work with that same easy rhythm she'd always had. The kind that hides a secret perfectly. The kitchen felt smaller after she left. I sat at the table, listening to the refrigerator hum and the old clock tick like a metronome for denial. I wanted to believe I'd misread the message, that it was a prank, a wrong number, something benign wrapped in bad phrasing. But the tone was too intimate. The casual certainty of a man who'd earned the right to speak that way. I went for a drive. The world outside was offensively normal. Kids on bikes, dogs barking, the bakery sign blinking like nothing had changed. I envied them, all of them, for the luxury of not knowing. By noon, I was parked outside Julia's office. I didn't plan it, the car just drifted there. Through the glass, I could see her laughing with someone by the copier. A tall man. Sharp suit. The kind of easy posture men wear when they've never been caught doing anything wrong. I recognized the tilt of his head, too close when she leaned in. When she touched his arm, my breath caught. I drove home with the windows down, the wind loud enough to drown the thoughts. But thoughts are patient. They wait for silence to crawl back in. That night, she made spaghetti and told me about her day as if nothing had happened. Every word was a test, and every smile a study in performance. I asked small questions, where she'd been for lunch, who stayed late. She answered easily, too easily, the way liars do when they've rehearsed. After dinner, she sat beside me on the couch, her head against my shoulder. I could feel her heartbeat. I wondered if it raced for me or for him. Around midnight, when she fell asleep, I opened her laptop. The password had changed. That was confirmation enough. I poured a glass of bourbon and sat by the window, watching the streetlights cast bars of gold across the pavement. Somewhere, an old dog barked and fell silent again. I thought of our wedding day, her nervous laugh, the promise that love meant never having to doubt. How clean it all felt back then. It's funny, the things you remember when betrayal enters the room. You don't remember arguments or old wounds. You remember the smell of her perfume on your coat that first winter together. The way she said your name like it was something fragile. You remember the illusion, and it hurts more than the fact. I didn't confront her that night. Not because I was afraid, but because anger is a poor strategist. And I intended to be deliberate. In war, patience wins. And make no mistake, this was war. People imagine betrayal as an explosion, something loud, fiery, unmistakable. They're wrong. It's quieter than that. It's a steady erosion, like a leak behind a wall that eats through the wood long before you see the stain. That week, Julia was kindness itself. She laughed easily, touched my arm when she passed behind me, even baked the lemon pie I loved but she hadn't made in years. To an outsider, it might have looked like affection. To me, it was camouflage. Guilt wears sweetness the way soldiers wear uniforms, meant to distract from the weapons underneath. I didn't accuse her. Not yet. I started listening. There's a rhythm to deceit, the pauses before answers, the unnecessary details, the way a liar looks you directly in the eye to prove what they don't believe themselves. Julia had that rhythm now. On Thursday, she said she'd be home late. A client dinner, she called it. I smiled, kissed her cheek, and watched her drive off in the car I'd paid for, wearing a red dress that hadn't seen daylight in months. When she disappeared around the corner, I poured myself another coffee, grabbed my jacket, and followed. The thing about following someone you love is that the heart argues with the eyes. You keep hoping to be wrong, to catch them doing something innocent. Every red light gives you a chance to turn around. I didn't. She parked at the Riverside Inn, a small boutique hotel near the highway, the kind that prides itself on discretion and dim lighting. I stayed in the car across the street, hands gripping the steering wheel until the leather creaked. I watched her step out, fix her hair in the window's reflection, and walk inside. 10 minutes later, Marcus arrived. He looked like the kind of man who considered himself charming. Expensive watch, lazy smile, the swagger of someone who never had to earn forgiveness. He glanced around before going in, but not carefully enough. Men like him believe they're untouchable until the world decides otherwise. I waited an hour. The lights in room 214 flicked on, soft and golden behind the curtains. I don't know how long I stared at them. Long enough for the coffee to go cold, long enough for something inside me to settle into stone. When Julia finally returned home, she smelled like another man's cologne wrapped in mint gum. She talked about traffic, about deadlines, about how people were exhausting. I nodded, each word she said sinking into me like small, deliberate cuts. That night, I lay beside her in bed. Her breathing slowed into sleep. I watched the rise and fall of her shoulders, wondering how many times she'd done the same beside me while thinking of someone else. Betrayal, it turns out, has a smell. It's not perfume or sweat. It's the coldness that creeps into a shared room when one heart's already gone elsewhere. The next morning, I met Pete Morales, a private investigator a friend had used during a custody battle. Pete looked like he'd been built out of cigarette smoke and sarcasm. He listened, nodded once, and said, "You want dirt, or you want closure?" "Truth," I said. "The kind that stands up in daylight." He smiled. "Daylight's expensive." A week later, he handed me a manila envelope. Inside were photographs. Julia and Marcus at a lakeside cafe, his hand on her thigh, her eyes closed in that lazy contentment I used to think was mine. There were receipts, timestamps, even a short recording from the hotel lobby. The proof was perfect. Too perfect, maybe? When I thanked him, Pete shrugged. "Careful what you do with it. Revenge tastes sweet, but it's hell on digestion." I laughed once, hollow. "Don't worry. I'm not out for blood." He looked at me the way a doctor looks at a patient who insists the wound's not that bad. Everybody says that. Right before they start cutting. That night, I sat in my office with the envelope open, the photos spread like cards in a game I hadn't chosen to play. The house was quiet except for the clock ticking, that damn steady clock that suddenly felt like it was marking down the seconds to something inevitable. I didn't hate her. That surprised me. Hate would have been simple. What I felt was deeper, older. A kind of grief with its teeth still in me. Because love doesn't vanish when it's betrayed, it just mutates. It turns into something heavy you carry until you find a place to set it down. I looked at the photos again. Julia laughing. Marcus leaning close. Their world, small and bright and dishonest. I thought about smashing the frame on our wedding picture, about burning the sheets, about leaving a note that said nothing but "I know." Instead, I closed the envelope and placed it in the drawer beside my desk. Revenge, I decided, wasn't about noise. It was about precision. If she'd chosen deceit, I'd answer with truth. And truth, when wielded right, cuts far deeper than anger ever could. There's a point after discovery when anger cools into something worse: focus. That's where I lived for weeks. I still woke up beside Julia every morning, made her coffee, kissed her cheek. Routine became theater. Every gesture rehearsed, every smile a lie. I performed better than she did. Pete kept feeding me information. Photos, phone records, receipts, a paper trail as precise as a surgeon's incision. I learned that Marcus was divorced, worked in real estate, and had a talent for finding lonely wives whose husbands were too steady to excite them. A collector of stability, he called himself in one of his recorded calls. Men like him mistake attention for love and conquest for connection. The recordings came from a microphone Pete had hidden in Julia's car vent, just a tiny device smaller than a coin. The first time I listened, I almost stopped it halfway through. Her voice, my wife's voice, sounded softer than I remembered, the tone she used when she still loved me. Only now it was for someone else. Julia, you make me feel like I'm 20 again. Marcus, then stay 20. Don't let him age you. They laughed. The sound of ice clinking in glasses. The slide of a hand, a quiet breath. I closed the laptop and sat in the dark for a long time, watching my reflection in the window. That night, something inside me stopped breaking and started rebuilding, colder, sharper. I didn't want violence. I wanted understanding, even if it hurt. I wanted her to look at me one day and see herself in the wreckage. But to do that, I had to keep calm. Rage ruins precision. I began documenting my days, timestamps, journal entries, short recordings. I learned her patterns the way a hunter learns wind. Tuesdays, she stayed late. Fridays, she drove to the gym, but never came back sweaty. Sundays, she suddenly needed space. The math of betrayal was flawless. Our house changed temperature. Conversations became small negotiations. Who takes out the trash? Who does the groceries? Underneath every word hummed a subtext neither of us dared name. There's a cruelty in pretending normal when both people know the stage is burning. One night, while she showered, her phone buzzed again. This time, I read the entire thread. Messages that stretched back months, dates, jokes, nicknames. Lighthouse, she called him. That word nearly ended me. Because she used to call me that, her light when things got dark. I didn't confront her. Not yet. I needed her to believe the mask still held. People show their truest selves when they think they're safe. So I let her. The next weekend, she suggested we take a small trip. Reconnect, she said. Her eyes too bright, her tone rehearsed. I agreed. It would buy me time, and time was the currency of my revenge. We drove to the mountains. The cabin had one of those fake fireplaces that flicker just enough to make you nostalgic. She tried to hold my hand during dinner. I let her. I even smiled. But every time she looked away, I saw Marcus's face behind her eyelids. That night, I lay awake listening to her breathe. There's something eerie about the sound of sleep when you know the dream beside you belongs to someone else. At dawn, I walked outside. The cold bit through my coat. The forest was silent, indifferent, ancient. It reminded me that everything built on deceit eventually returns to dust. I watched the first light crawl across the trees and whispered, "You're not getting away with this." When we got back home, I called Pete. "I need more than proof," I said. "I need understanding. I want to know why she did this." Pete sighed. "Why?" "Because she could. Because people like comfort more than loyalty." "You sure you want to open that box?" "I already did," I said. "Now I'm just cataloging the contents." In the following days, I shadowed my own life. I worked, smiled, paid bills, fixed the fence, all while recording, collecting, archiving. Julia thought she was conducting an affair in secret. She didn't realize she was starring in her own confession. The first time I saw Marcus up close, it was accidental. I'd stopped at the gas station near her office, and there he was, filling up his car, talking on his phone. He didn't recognize me. He laughed at something, flashing those perfect teeth, the kind of smile that probably made Julia feel young again. I studied him the way a craftsman studies a broken tool, not with hatred, but with curiosity about the flaw. Driving home, I rehearsed what I'd eventually say to her. Not shouting, not pleading, just a quiet dissection of truth. You wanted to feel alive, I'd tell her. But you didn't realize you'd kill something to get there. For now I waited. Revenge, I'd learned, is not an act. It's a process, a slow distillation of emotion until only clarity remains. So I let the weeks unfold. I let her lie. I let the deceit ferment. Because the longer a lie matures, the more bitter its truth tastes when it's finally poured. There's a discipline to planning revenge the way there is to restoring an old clock. You take it apart carefully, you label the tiny screws, and you don't let anger make you lose the springs. I spent days on lists, not because I loved lists but because they turn feelings into work. Work is manageable. Grief and fury aren't. I began by deciding what I wouldn't do. No violence, no public shaming on social media, no theatrics that would scar our children. I wanted consequence, not cruelty. I wanted her to see the ledger and understand that choices have weight. I wanted Marcus to experience the precise, slow collapse of a man who mistook people for assets. That required patience, and patience requires structure. First, evidence. Pete handed me an organized packet that read like a forensic novel. Photographs, timestamps, hotel receipts, call logs, a string of texts that painted the banal architecture of betrayal. He'd even tracked a credit card charge for a weekend trip and the GPS pings placing Julia's car near a motel's back entrance. Each document was a paper nail. Collect enough of them and a coffin gets built out of facts, not fury. Second, a timeline. Humans understand narrative. When presented with a story, we find cause and meaning. I arranged the proof not as a scatter of grievances but as a sequence. When, where, who, how. If she tried to dismiss one piece as coincidence, the timeline would show pattern. If Marcus tried to claim innocence, the dates would speak louder than his mouth. Third, counsel. I spoke to James, an old friend and a lawyer who still smelled faintly of the army and cheap whiskey. He listened without surprise. "You're rational about this," he said, which was a compliment in his mouth. "Good. Emotion is a sloppy hand in court." He explained the chain of custody, how to preserve recordings without destroying legality, how to keep receipts intact, how to present evidence so it couldn't be brushed aside as tampering. He arranged contacts, a forensic audio analyst who could authenticate recordings, a document examiner for the receipts, and a notary who kept impeccable records. I felt something like comfort when men spoke in their professional languages. It grounded the chaos. Fourth, a public skeleton, private heart. I decided the eventual disclosure would have a form, a meeting in a neutral office, a mediator present, and a limited audience, my lawyer, a mediator, and Julia. No press, no rabble. If she wanted privacy, she'd have it. If she wanted to walk away with dignity, she could. The aim was moral exposure, not spectacle. I wanted truth to do its surgical work in a place designed for careful incisions. The law provides atmosphere for that: solemn chairs, a table that says business, a clerk who records what's said. It felt merciful. But before the disclosure, there was the psychological layer. People defend themselves by telling a different story about their lives. To unspool that fiction, I needed more than receipts. I needed to create a context where denial would be the least useful response. That meant arranging for small, undeniable moments that nudged her toward reality without forcing it. For instance, a lost photo left where she couldn't help but see it, an innocuous question asked in front of friends that set the tone of normalcy, a dinner invite that required a public check-in. The idea wasn't to entrap but to let truth gather its own light. I also considered the children. They were the axis on which my world balanced, and I would not allow them to be collateral. So I built their protection into the plan: financial buffers, legal safeguards to ensure no sudden transfers, and living arrangements that kept their routines stable. I wanted them to feel the continuity of home even while the adults around them were learning hard lessons. That was important, and not sentimental, it was pragmatic. Chaos fractures kids' sense of safety in ways that last. Pete, in his staccato way, recommended a few theatrical but honest tactics. "Leave a door unlocked once," he said. Let them think the world is still normal, and then show the cracks. He was half cynical, half poet. People reveal themselves in comfort. So I ordered small comforts, a fresh loaf of bread on the counter, a playlist of songs Julia liked playing through the house, little comforts that made them relax. People relax and talk. When they talk, they leave footprints. Next came the digital housekeeping. I created secure copies of all material and stored them in at least 2 places, a safety deposit and a cloud account accessible only by trusted counsel. Redundancy is the friend of truth. No one wants evidence to disappear on a technicality when the moment comes to use it. There was also the moral architecture of the plan. I didn't want to forever be the man who wielded truth like a weapon. So part of the planning involved a path forward, mediation and counseling options for Julia, resources listed for Marcus if he chose to face consequences and attempt repair, and practical pathways for me to step back from the role of prosecutor into whatever life came next. I needed a bridge out of this story for everyone involved, not just an exit ramp into vengeance. Finally, I built in contingencies. People who act from weakness are unpredictable. Marcus might run, he might deny, he might attempt to bribe or to blackmail. I prepared for those moves. James had recommendations for emergency filings and temporary restraining orders. Pete had contacts who could verify alibis. We had a prosecutor friend who indicated willingness to at least look at evidence if it were presented cleanly. The strange thing about planning is how it takes emotion and makes it useful. The same rage that could have burned everything down was now measured into steps, each one forward, each one deliberate. It felt less like revenge and more like a restoration of order. I am not proud of that sentence, but it was true. I wanted order again. The house had been a ledger of trust, and someone had been scribbling outside the margins. When the lists were done, when receipts clicked into place and the timeline looked like a sequence of inevitabilities, I sat alone in the study. The lamp threw a small pool of light over the papers. I poured bourbon and watched it catch the glow. There's a comfort to seeing a plan assembled. It doesn't heal the wound, but it makes the wound understandable. I slept poorly that night, but I slept with intention. The plan was not cruelty. It was a gift in a perverse way, a gift of clarity that would let everyone involved make choices that mattered. And in the morning, I taped a small note to the kitchen window that read, "Tell the truth when it is time to be brave." Then I drove to work, hands steady on the wheel, a man learning how to live with a new kind of patience. I always believed that revenge should feel like justice wearing gloves, measured, precise, almost polite. The moment of execution wasn't one grand explosion. It was a slow tightening of threads until they all led to one knot. The plan started with small shifts in my behavior. I wanted her comfortable enough to hang herself with her own confidence. I began to compliment her more, to ask about her days with an attentiveness that felt new to her. She softened, believing that guilt could be disguised with affection. That was fine by me. The more she trusted the illusion of safety, the cleaner the revelation would be. Pete had set up what he called the mirror. It was a quiet surveillance package, a couple of cameras disguised as USB chargers and a car tracker that fed location data to a shared drive. Each time Julia said she was staying late, I'd check the feed and see Marcus's car idling near her office or the hotel lot. The digital mirror reflected her life back at me with pitiless accuracy. I began to know her days better than she did. The night before disclosure, I sat in the study with the gathered proof spread out like a battle map. James called to confirm logistics, neutral venue, mediator present, copies of all documents secured. "You sure you want to do it this way?" he asked. "Yes," I said. "If I yell, she'll remember noise. If I show her truth, she'll remember silence." He whistled softly. "That's cold." "No," I said. "That's controlled." Morning came too clean for what I was about to do. The air smelled of rain, and sunlight fell through the blinds in narrow, accusing lines. Julia wore blue, her presentation color, the one she used when she wanted to look reliable. She told me she had a work meeting at 10. I told her we should grab lunch after. She smiled, thinking we were healing. At 9:40, she walked into the conference room expecting a business session. Instead, she found me, James, and a mediator sitting around a table. She froze, confusion curdling into dread. Tom? What is this? Just clarity, I said. Sit down. The mediator, a calm woman with gray hair and the posture of a judge, began with neutral words. This is an informal meeting intended to resolve personal matters with dignity. Julia sat slowly, her eyes darting between us. James opened the folder and slid the first document across. We'll start simple, dates, travel logs. Her hands trembled when she saw Marcus's signature on a hotel receipt. Then came the photos. The GPS logs. The recordings. Each one an arrow that found its mark. I didn't speak. I wanted the paper to do the talking. At first, she tried to deny. This is an invasion. But the evidence dismantled her sentence before it could finish. Her face went white, then red, then something between shame and disbelief. You followed me? She whispered. No, I said evenly. You led me. Silence filled the room, thick, unbearable. She looked at me, eyes wet, voice breaking. Tom, I didn't mean to hurt you. I almost laughed. Meaning doesn't save anyone. Meaning is a bandage people put on after the knife's already in. I leaned forward. You didn't just hurt me. You rewrote me. You made me question every memory we had. Do you understand what that does to a man? The mediator cleared her throat. Mr. Hale, we should keep tone, it's fine, Julia said quietly. He's right. When Marcus arrived 20 minutes later, called under the pretense of urgent business, the temperature in the room dropped another 10 degrees. He walked in, saw me, and his grin faltered. What the hell is this? James slid him his own packet. Evidence of fraud, emotional misconduct, and attempted coercion. Marcus laughed too loud. You can't be serious. Sit down, I said, calm as a prayer. We're not in a courtroom. You'll get your chance to speak. He tried charm first, smiling at Julia, touching her arm. She pulled away. Then he tried arrogance, questioning my masculinity, implying I'd driven her away. I let him talk himself into a hole. Then I pressed play on the recording where he bragged to a friend. She thinks I'm her escape. Once she signs that refinance, I'll get what I want and move on. Julia's breath hitched. You said? He stammered, color draining from his face. That was a joke. No, I said, standing slowly. That was your truth. Just not meant for daylight. He tried to leave. James reminded him that leaving wouldn't stop the copies already filed with both HR and the bank investigating his falsified loan signatures. Marcus sat down again, suddenly smaller, his confidence leaking like air from a punctured tire. Julia covered her face. God, she whispered. What have I done? I didn't answer. Sometimes silence is the fairest response. The mediator recorded the final notes, asked each of us to acknowledge receipt. I signed last, my hand steady. Marcus refused to look at me when he left. Julia stayed seated long after the door closed. When she finally spoke, her voice was raw. Did you ever love me, after you found out? Yes, I said. That's why I didn't destroy you. She started to cry, but it wasn't loud. It was the quiet kind, the sound of something folding in on itself. I left her there with the papers. She needed to face the ghosts without a witness. Outside, the rain had started again, thin, persistent, honest. James clapped my shoulder. You did it clean. It was never about clean, I said. It was about truth. Driving home, I didn't feel triumphant. I felt empty, but in a way that meant the poison was leaving my system. The house looked different when I walked in, bare, but intact. The kind of emptiness you can rebuild from. That night, I sat in the dark with a single light on, reading her old letters, the ones from when we still believed in forever. They didn't hurt as much as I expected. Maybe because forever, I realized, doesn't always mean endless time. Sometimes it means a story long enough to learn who people really are. Tomorrow would bring paperwork and endings, but tonight I had silence. And silence, after a storm, feels almost like peace. The morning after disclosure, the house smelled of rain and paper. The table still bore the faint imprint of where the folders had rested, as if evidence could leave a bruise. Julia didn't come home that night. Her absence sat in the rooms like smoke that refuses to clear. I didn't chase her. Some silences deserved to stay unanswered for a while. James called at noon. "It's done," he said. Marcus tendered his resignation from the firm. HR opened an internal audit. "Your wife." He hesitated. "Julia called to ask if she could see you privately." "No," I said. "Not yet." He understood. He'd been through his own wreck once. "You'll have to talk eventually," he said. "Closure doesn't come by mail." "I'm not looking for closure," I said. "I'm looking for quiet." After the call, I walked through the house. Every room carried echoes. The photos on the wall became courtroom exhibits in my mind, moments I could no longer trust for context. Was she already lying in that picture from Santa Fe? Was she texting him between smiles? The human brain can't help but rewrite history once the verdict's in. By afternoon, I found myself outside in the garden. The fig tree I'd planted 20 years ago had grown twisted but sturdy, branches reaching toward the fence. I started pruning dead leaves. It felt right, cutting away what no longer nourished the living. Gardening has its own theology. Remove decay, feed the roots, let the thing heal itself. It's a form of prayer that doesn't need belief. 3 days passed before Julia appeared. She stood at the gate, eyes swollen, hands trembling around a paper bag. "I brought your favorite, coffee from that place on 5th. Her voice was small, the same tone she used when she'd broken a dish years ago. She didn't come closer until I nodded. She placed the cup on the porch railing and said, "I wanted to see you. Not to excuse anything. Just to face it." I said nothing. The wind moved the chimes, soft and offbeat. "I keep thinking about the moment you looked at me yesterday," she said. "You didn't yell. You didn't even flinch. That was worse than shouting." "That's because shouting would have given you a role to play," I said. "I didn't want to make you a victim of your own choices." Her lips parted. "I deserve that." "No," I said. "You deserve the truth. That's different." She nodded slowly, tears tracking down. "I didn't fall out of love with you, Tom. I just forgot what love looked like when life got quiet. Marcus made me feel seen again, and I mistook that for meaning." I studied her face. It was honest, or as close as she knew how to be. "You wanted an audience," I said. "Not a partner." "I know." Her voice broke. "And I ruined everything." I took a slow breath. "You didn't ruin everything. You just proved that nothing is permanent unless both people keep tending to it. We both let the garden die, Julia. You just went looking for another one." She cried harder then, covering her face. I let her. Letting someone cry is sometimes the only mercy left. Before she left, she asked, "Is there any chance we could rebuild something?" I thought about it. About forgiveness as a concept, how people romanticize it, make it sound noble. Forgiveness isn't noble, it's arithmetic. You weigh what's left against what's lost. "Maybe someday," I said. "But not today." When she walked away, she looked smaller than I'd ever seen her. Part of me wanted to run after her, to hold her and remember the good years. But the rest of me knew better. Some things, once broken, cut deeper when you tried to hold them again. Over the next weeks, life rearranged itself. Marcus tried to call, 3 times. I didn't answer. Pete told me he'd moved to another city, chasing some new job, some new version of himself. Julia went to therapy. I knew because she sent a message saying, "I'm learning things about myself I should have known before." I didn't reply. But I wasn't untouched. Nights were the hardest. The bed felt too large, the house too still. Memory became a trick mirror, reflecting her laugh, her smell, the sound of her keys in the lock. Betrayal doesn't end when the truth comes out, it echoes, reshaping even the simplest habits. I'd catch myself setting 2 cups of coffee, 2 plates, before remembering there was only me now. So I built new rituals. Morning runs, evening bourbon, pruning, journaling. Writing helped, not as confession but as architecture, a way to make sense of chaos through sentences. I wrote, "Revenge is only half the cure. The other half is endurance." One evening, I found a letter in the mailbox, no return address. Inside, Julia had written, "I've been sober from lies for 37 days. I don't expect redemption, but I wanted you to know that I see the damage clearly now. Whatever comes next, I'll carry that truth honestly. Thank you for showing me what silence can teach." I folded it once and placed it in the drawer with the evidence. Proof of both crime and comprehension. The next morning, I burned the photographs. The smoke curled upward, thin and forgiving. The act wasn't about erasing her, it was about ending my role as the archivist of pain. Let the universe keep its own records. Afterward, I sat on the porch with a mug of coffee. The air was clean, honest. A neighbor waved from across the street. I waved back. Life, indifferent but steady, continued. That night, for the first time in months, I slept without dreams. Or maybe the dream was simply quiet enough that I didn't wake to check for ghosts. The reckoning, I realized, wasn't the confrontation or the fallout. It was this, learning to live without the hunger to be right, the need to punish, the echo of anger. When the world finally stopped spinning, I didn't feel victorious. I felt free. Freedom isn't the feeling people imagine. It doesn't rush in with trumpets or sunlight, it drifts quietly, like dust after a demolition. You sit in the silence and realize the noise was holding you up. After Julia left, that's what the days felt like, hollow, echoing, but strangely clean. I kept the house. The mortgage, the memories, the routines. Selling it felt like erasing too much of myself. Besides, I'd built it. I wanted to see if something still lived in the bones after all the pretending was stripped away. The first week alone was brutal. Every object looked like evidence. Her mug beside the sink, the imprint of her perfume on the hall rug, a single earring under the dresser. Ghosts, not of the dead, but of the almost living. I learned to throw things away without ceremony. Healing sometimes begins with garbage bags. Work helped. Numbers, tasks, meetings, they didn't lie. They filled hours that would otherwise be spent in the swamp of memory. I started running again, early mornings when the street lamp still hummed and the sky was the color of steel. I liked the rhythm, the clean ache in my chest. It reminded me that my body still belonged to me, even if my past didn't. One afternoon, I met Pete for coffee. He looked pleased, almost proud. "You came through cleaner than most," he said. "Most men, they go nuclear, lose their jobs, get arrested, start drinking like they're trying to drown an ocean." "I thought about it," I said. "The drinking part, at least." He grinned. "Thinking ain't doing. Means you're ahead of the curve." He slid a flash drive across the table. "Final report? Copies of everything, in case you ever need them again." I stared at it for a moment, then pushed it back. "Keep it. If I hold on to that, I'll never stop checking the wound." He nodded slowly, pocketed it. "Fair enough." Walking home afterward, I realized I'd crossed an invisible line. I no longer cared where she was or who she was with. Curiosity had burned out, replaced by an even stranger emotion, pity. Not the patronizing kind, but the kind that comes from seeing someone's addiction clearly. Julia wasn't addicted to Marcus, she was addicted to being adored. That's a hunger that never ends. I was finally full. Weeks turned into months. Spring leaned toward summer, and the world stopped feeling hostile. The fig tree bore fruit again. The birds returned. I began repairing the porch railing I'd neglected for years. It was tedious, careful work, sand, measure, paint, repeat. But it was good to build something honest with my hands. The body knows things the mind forgets, It knows that repair is slower than destruction but far more satisfying. Then, one evening in June, Julia called. Her voice was calmer, clearer. "I wanted to tell you," she said. "I've been accepted into a counseling program. For couples. I thought maybe learning how to help others might help me understand what I broke." "That's good," I said, surprised by how much I meant it. "You sound lighter," she said softly. "I am. You gave me silence, Julia. It's more useful than forgiveness." She laughed, not mockingly, almost with relief. "I guess we both learned how to speak without noise." We talked for a few minutes more, about logistics, the divorce proceedings, mutual friends. When she hung up, I realized it didn't hurt anymore. The scar was there, yes, but it didn't throb. It just was. Later that night, I poured a single bourbon, turned on a jazz record, and sat by the open window. The air smelled of cut grass and distant rain. I thought about Marcus, not with hatred, but with a sort of detached curiosity. Men like him are their own punishment. They spend their lives chasing novelty, mistaking attention for devotion until the world stops applauding. I didn't need to hate him. The law of consequence already had his number. People started to notice I'd changed. My neighbor, Ellen, said I looked awake again. My daughter, who'd been cautious around both of us, came by more often, bringing her kids. The house felt alive again with their noise. The laughter of children, I learned, can drown out almost anything. One Sunday, Ellen invited me for dinner. Nothing romantic, just company. She was widowed 5 years prior, quiet but with the kind of steadiness that doesn't demand anything. We talked about music, gardening, the absurdity of growing older. It was easy. When she laughed, I realized I hadn't heard genuine laughter in my kitchen for nearly a year. When I walked home later, the streetlights were buzzing, the air thick with the scent of blooming jasmine. I stopped halfway down the block and looked at the night sky. It wasn't dramatic, no thunder, no signs, but I felt the axis of my life tilt slightly towards something gentler. That's the thing no one tells you about revenge. It doesn't end with satisfaction. It ends with possibility. Once the reckoning is complete, you're left with a blank page, and that's terrifying and liberating all at once. You either start writing again or you rot in the margins. I chose to write. Literally, at first. I began a journal, not about her, not about the betrayal, but about what came next. Notes about rebuilding, small joys, the taste of freedom, the strange beauty of mornings when nobody lies to you anymore. By August, the house no longer felt haunted. The echoes had softened into memories, and the memories had lost their power to wound. I didn't know what the next chapter of my life would be, but for the first time in years, I was curious instead of afraid. I looked at the empty chair across the table and didn't see loss anymore. I saw space. And space, I realized, was the beginning of peace. Autumn came the way it always does in our town, quietly, like a secret you notice too late. The air thinned, the mornings carried that metallic chill, and the trees began the slow surrender from green to gold. I was raking leaves when Julia returned. She didn't call first. Just appeared at the gate, wrapped in a gray coat, a single envelope in her hand. Her hair was shorter, darker, streaked with the kind of humility that comes from too much thinking. When she saw me, she hesitated, as though the space between us was a border she might not be allowed to cross. "I wasn't sure you'd still be here," she said. "I built this house," I replied. "I'm not the one who leaves." She nodded once, eyes flicking toward the porch where the fig tree's shadows stretched long across the boards. "Can I come in?" I should have said no. But mercy, like habit, is hard to break. I gestured toward the porch chairs. "You can sit." We sat across from each other, the rake still leaning against my knee like a reluctant witness. She placed the envelope between us. "Divorce papers," she said softly. "Signed. No disputes. I wanted to bring them myself." "Thank you." I didn't touch them. Paperwork felt too clinical for what lingered in the air. We sat in the long silence that only two people with shared ghosts can manage. Finally, she spoke. You look different. So do you, I said. Less certain? She smiled faintly. That's a compliment, isn't it? It is. Her eyes wandered to the garden. The figs came early this year. They did. I used to love when they did that, she said. You'd fill the baskets and pretend it was a harvest festival. I remember. Another pause. Then, quietly, I'm sorry, Tom. I know. No, I mean really sorry. Not the kind you say when you're caught. The kind that comes after you've seen what you've done. I studied her. There was no performance this time. The years had stripped her down to something raw, maybe even honest. What did you see? That I wasn't chasing love, she said. I was running from myself. And you stood still long enough to let me see it. I didn't answer. There are apologies that need no witness, only air. She looked down, twisting the ring she still wore. I kept it, she said, noticing my glance. Not as a symbol. As a reminder. That promises don't die, they just live in different places. Sometimes they live in graves, I said. She winced. Fair. We sat until the wind picked up, scattering leaves across the porch. She shivered, not from cold but from memory. I wanted to thank you, she said. You could have ruined me. You didn't. Ruining you wouldn't have fixed me. Still, she whispered, you chose grace. I chose truth, I corrected. Grace came later. Her eyes met mine, steady now. Do you ever miss me? I thought about that. About the decades, the laughter, the rituals. Sometimes, I said. But I think I miss the person I believed you were more than the person you were. She nodded. That's fair. I miss the man who didn't have to be so strong all the time. That man died the night your phone buzzed. She looked down again, tears gathering but not falling. I deserve that. I leaned back, listening to the sound of wind against the fig leaves. You don't deserve punishment anymore. You've served your sentence. She gave a small, sad smile. You talk like a judge. I feel like one, I said. A tired one. We both laughed at that small, fragile laughter that didn't try to heal anything. It just existed, two ghosts testing if humor still lived in their mouths. When she stood to leave, I didn't stop her. She paused at the gate. If you ever want to talk, not about us, just about life, I'm around. I'll remember that, I said. Take care of yourself. She hesitated. You already did. And then she was gone. I stayed on the porch long after, the rake forgotten. The sky dimmed, the air filled with the smell of rain. The envelope sat between us like a tombstone to a life that used to be. I finally picked it up, signed my name where hers already waited, and placed it on the mantel. Closure, I realized, doesn't happen with words. It happens with ink. That night, I walked the garden paths with a lantern. The soil was cool underfoot, the trees whispering in the dark. I thought about mercy, how it's not a gift you give others, but one you grant yourself when you stop replaying the story. Revenge had ended long ago. What remained was understanding. The kind that doesn't need forgiveness to function. When I came back inside, the house didn't feel haunted anymore. It just felt lived in, like a body healing after surgery, scarred but stronger. I poured a glass of water, not bourbon, and raised it slightly toward the quiet air. To the truth, I said aloud. May it never be wasted. For the first time, I meant it. And the house, patient and silent, seemed to agree. Redemption isn't a clean word. People imagine it as light pouring through a stained glass window, forgiveness blooming like spring. But that's not how it comes. It arrives quietly, without music, disguised as ordinary days that don't hurt anymore. After Julia's visit, the world didn't shift dramatically. There was no cinematic closure, no sudden peace. What came was softer, a kind of inner exhale that didn't need applause. I signed the final documents, dropped them at the post office, and when the clerk stamped them, it sounded like the last heartbeat of a dying story. The next morning, I woke before dawn, made coffee, and realized something simple. There were no ghosts in the kitchen. Just light. The air was clean, neutral. It didn't smell like memory anymore. I leaned against the counter, holding the mug, and whispered, "You're free." It took me a moment to realize I was talking to myself. I started working with my hands again. The porch railing needed repair, the garage door needed painting, and the old truck I'd neglected for years begged for a new engine. Manual labor has a way of mending the soul. It demands focus, not philosophy. There's no room for self-pity when you're sanding wood or tightening bolts. Each sound, scrape, click, creak, felt like punctuation in a sentence that finally made sense again. Ellen stopped by sometimes, bringing her dog, Scout. She had a kindness that didn't intrude. One Saturday, we sat drinking lemonade under the fig tree. Scout chased shadows across the grass while Ellen told me about her husband's passing. "Grief," she said, "never leaves. It just changes shape." I nodded. Mine changed into silence. "Then you're lucky," she said. "Silence listens." There was no romance between us, not yet, maybe not ever. But there was ease, an understanding that didn't need explanation. For months, I'd lived as though every interaction was a negotiation. With Ellen, it was just air. Simple, breathable air. In the evenings, I'd take long walks along the river. The same path Julia and I used to walk years ago. At first, it felt wrong, like trespassing on my own past. But with each step, the ghosts retreated. I began to see the river differently, not as the backdrop to an old life, but as a constant, something untouched by human failure. The water moved forward, always forward. No backward eddies, no hesitation. I envied it, then I learned from it. Around October, I received a letter from Julia's therapist, just one page, professional, but with a line that caught me off guard. She is learning accountability. She speaks of you not as a villain or a victim, but as a mirror. That word, mirror, stuck with me. Maybe that's all relationships really are. Reflections that show us what we love, what we fear, and what we're capable of breaking. Julia had seen her reflection too late. I was lucky enough to see mine just in time. I decided to visit my daughter in Denver. The trip was long overdue. She met me at the airport with her 2 kids, all smiles and noise and color. The house smelled like cinnamon and crayons. Watching them run around, I felt something I hadn't felt in years: continuity. Life doesn't end with betrayal, it just changes authors. That night, my daughter and I sat on the porch, the kids asleep upstairs. She poured me tea and said, "You seem lighter." "I am," I said. "I stopped carrying someone else's choices." She nodded thoughtfully. "Mom called me a few months ago. She told me you handled everything with grace. Said you saved her from herself?" I stared at the horizon. "No one saves anyone. We just stopped making it easy for them to lie." We didn't talk about Julia after that. We didn't need to. The subject had turned into history, important, but no longer urgent. When I came home, the house felt different again. Warmer. The first snow had fallen, covering the garden like an eraser over an old sketch. I sat by the window, watching flakes drift past the lamplight, and realized that redemption isn't found in other people, it's found in your ability to live kindly after being broken. I began volunteering at a local workshop that helped young mechanics learn trade skills. It felt good to teach. I saw versions of my younger self in them, reckless, hopeful, unaware of how fragile trust could be. I told them something I wish someone had told me. Don't build your worth around someone else's eyes. Build something that can stand on its own. They laughed, but they listened. And I realized teaching is another form of repair. You pass on what nearly destroyed you so others might learn to build differently. By December, the house was full again, not of people, but of presence. Music played on weekends, the smell of wood polish lingered, the old photos no longer haunted me. I didn't throw them out, I reframed them. They weren't reminders of deceit anymore, they were records of a life that existed, imperfect but real. One evening, Ellen brought a small gift, a framed quote she'd found in a thrift store. It read, "Truth is not revenge, it's release." I hung it in the hallway where the wedding photo used to be. Every time I walked past, it reminded me that justice doesn't always roar. Sometimes it whispers, "Enough." The nights grew long again, but they didn't feel lonely. I'd sit by the window, the world outside dark and still, and feel something close to gratitude. Not for what happened, but for what came after, the strange, unsentimental grace of survival. Revenge had started as a weapon. It ended as a mirror. And in that reflection, for the first time in years, I saw a man I could live with. Winter peeled back slowly that year, as if the world itself was reluctant to move on. The mornings came pale and brittle, and the light had a kind of honesty to it, sharp, unforgiving, but clean. I'd grown to like that kind of light. It didn't flatter, it told the truth. By February, the house was quieter than ever, but not the kind of quiet that aches. It was a working quiet, the hum of the heater, the soft scrape of boots at the door, the whisper of pages turning. I'd learned how to be alone without being lonely. There's a difference. Loneliness is hunger. Solitude is balance. The divorce papers came back finalized in a plain brown envelope, the legal equivalent of a period at the end of a long, unruly sentence. I signed where needed, mailed back what was required, and then made myself a strong cup of coffee. I didn't toast or mourn. I just sat by the window and watched a thin line of sunlight slide across the kitchen floor. It felt like closure, though no one says closure can be that quiet. That week, I cleaned out the last of Julia's things. Her books, her scarves, the perfume bottles lined like glass soldiers on the vanity. I didn't throw them away. I packed them carefully and left them on the porch with a note that read, "For when memory feels kind instead of cruel." She never came for them. Maybe she didn't need to. Maybe she, too, had finally learned that not every story requires a return. One evening, Ellen stopped by with a casserole and 2 glasses. "You're starting to look like a man again," she said, teasing but warm. "What did I look like before? Like a ghost pretending to be polite." We ate together, laughed about small things, and for the first time in a long time, laughter didn't sound foreign in that house. When she left, I didn't feel the familiar drop of silence behind her. Just calm. It occurred to me that peace isn't something you find, it's what's left when you stop fighting yourself. I spent most of March fixing the old fence. The boards had warped over the years, much like people do. Some were too rotten to salvage, others just needed sanding and new nails. I thought about Julia while I worked, not as a wound, but as a lesson. Some planks you replace, some you mend, and some you leave as they are because the imperfections tell the truth about time. By the time spring rolled around, the garden was alive again. The fig tree was thick with buds, and the air carried that strange mix of sweetness and decay that only early spring knows. I started keeping a journal, not about the past, but about what I was building next. Notes about the weather, the progress of the plants, the faces of neighbors when they waved hello. Ordinary things. The kind of things you overlook when you're too busy holding on to pain. One afternoon, while pruning the fig tree, I found a small silver earring buried in the soil. One of hers, no doubt, a leftover from another life. I held it up to the light, then placed it in my palm and closed my fingers around it. I didn't feel anger or nostalgia. Just acceptance. Then I set it gently at the base of the tree, like compost. Let the earth have it. Let something good come from what was lost. That evening, I walked down to the river. The same river that had once been a witness to everything, to her laughter, to my suspicion, to my first breath of revenge. The water was high from melting snow, fast and cold. I stood on the bank and thought about how much of life is like that, constant movement, carrying pieces of the past away grain by grain. I picked up a smooth stone, rubbed it between my fingers, and dropped it into the current. No symbolism, no farewell, just gravity doing what it does. When I got home, I poured myself a small bourbon and sat on the porch as twilight settled. The streetlights flickered on, one by one, steady and unremarkable. Somewhere down the block, a child laughed. A dog barked. The ordinary orchestra of living. I realized then that revenge had never been the ending, it had been the midpoint. The act of exposure wasn't destruction, it was excavation. It cleared the rot so something else could grow. I hadn't sought forgiveness, but I had found something quieter and more enduring: understanding. I wrote one last entry in my journal that night. Justice isn't the opposite of mercy. It's the soil mercy grows from. Without truth, nothing good takes root. But once truth stands in the light, mercy knows where to land. I closed the notebook and placed it beside the lamp. Outside, the wind moved through the fig leaves with a sound like breathing. Later, when I turned off the lights and walked down the hallway, I passed the framed quote Ellen had given me: "Truth is not revenge. It's release." I touched the glass gently, almost in gratitude. The house didn't echo anymore. It listened. I went to bed early, not because I was tired, but because there was nothing left to stay awake for. No ghosts, no guilt, no rage. Just the hum of a world that had finally stopped demanding explanations. As I drifted toward sleep, one thought stayed with me, the simplest, truest sentence of all. What survives us is not what we destroy, but what we repair. And that, I decided, was enough. If this story spoke to you, please like, subscribe, and leave a comment. I'd love to hear your thoughts. You can continue the journey by clicking the box on the left. Thank you for being here.